Now, I already have two problems in this photo that I think AI can solve. The first is that I have an overexposed sky, and the second is that I would love for this to feel a little bit more creative and interesting with a new sky altogether. So here's the first two examples that we could use AI for in our images. Using the Lasso tool by pressing L, we can just go and select the overexposed area in our image, or in this case, the overexposed area as well as the area that I want to have a new sky in. Just creating that lasso selection, we can go to Generative Fill, and then if you were just selecting a hotspot, you could leave this empty and click on Generate, or in this case, I want a new sky. So I'll go Dark, Moody, Sky, and press on Generate. This gives me 3 variations to choose from with a variety of skies. If I didn't like any of them, I could click Generate again to get some more options, but I think this looks good enough. And now with pretty much no effort and no advanced selection skills, I can go and add a totally new feel to this image. But these are just 2 of the 37 ways that we can creatively use AI in Photoshop. So let's keep going and move on to the next example. One thing I love adding into images is overlays, but sometimes it's a pain to go and find overlays online, especially if you need to pay for them. So you can generate some of your own with AI, just pressing Command or Control A to select your entire canvas, going to Generative Fill and typing what you want. I'll type in film grain, dust, and scratches texture on black and click on Generate. This will fill the entire canvas with this new generation, and we'll be able to blend it in with our underlying image with a simple adjustment. Finding the option that we like the most, let's say this one, we can now change our layer blending mode down here to screen to remove all of the black. We can reduce the opacity of this layer, and then now we have this nice textured film grain that we didn't have to go and search the internet for. We just made it with AI. Next, we can create reflections using AI based on other layers in our project. All we need to do to define an area is grab our rectangular marquee tool, go and click and drag over the area we want our reflection to be visible in, overlapping a little bit with that text, and then we can just type in reflection, press on Generate, and now we'll get this great looking result that's blended into the foreground. It may take a few generations to get this, as it did in my example, but you can always recreate new variations by clicking on the properties icon and clicking on Generate again to continue making new versions of it until you're happy with the result. We can also turn our photos into paintings, but we first need to create a new channel layer to ensure that the AI doesn't go overboard and just make an entirely new photo. We want to keep the details of our original image for this effect. Going to the Channels panel, I'll click on the new channel layer, and then we want to increase the contrast of this. I'll press Command or Control M to access the curves, and then bring up the black point to a very subtle value. Let's say somewhere between 10 to 25 for the output. So we'll have a slightly selected canvas. Click OK. Now to turn this into a selection to base our generation off of, we'll hold Command or Control, click on the layer thumbnail to create a selection. A warning message will appear, but we'll just click OK. Go back to the Layers panel here, click on Generative Fill, and let's say watercolor painting. Click on Generate. And now our photo is turned into a piece of art with all of our details maintained. We can also use AI to retouch our photos, especially with complex situations like removing the flare from our subject's glasses. Rather than dealing with all these brush adjustments, we can again use channels to select the area and then use AI to fill this in. So going to channels, and then we want to find the channel that has the most contrast around the flare in the glasses. I'll then duplicate this channel by clicking and dragging to the new channel icon. And then with the duplicated channel that had the most contrast for the flare, we'll increase that contrast by pressing Command or Control L, bringing up the shadows so that we're darkening everything around the glasses and his eyes, isolating those reflections further, and then bringing up the highlights to make those reflections more intense. This looks good enough for me here. I'll click OK. And now we can turn this into a selection by holding Command or Control and clicking on the thumbnail of that channel. Going back to the channels panel now, we want to isolate our selection to only around his eyes. We can do this really easily with the rectangular marquee tool. I'll set it to the intersect mode and then click and drag just over his eyes like so. So it'll get rid of all of the selection area except for around his eyes. Now any extra areas that we do not want, we'll go to the Lasso tool, choose the subtract mode, and then we can just loop around all of the unwanted areas that are not the reflection. With our selection refined, we'll go to Generative Fill, leave it empty so that Photoshop will just know to remove the contents of the selections and click on Generate. Just like that, all of the reflections are gone. Turning that on and off, that was super easy to do and it didn't take any advanced techniques. While still in this same example, another use of AI is to add some facial hair or even improve facial hair. So let's go and create a selection around our subject's chin here. So I'm going to use the Lasso tool in the new selection mode, and then just click and drag around my subject's hairline or where I want his beard to appear. I'll go somewhere like this, down this way, and over. Now, if you want to add to your selection, just hold the Shift key and say we could go and fill this area in as well. So that way Photoshop has a clear beard area to generate from. With that, we can click on Generative Fill, type in beard, and click Generate. Our first option looks a little bit silly, but if we click on some other ones, this one looks pretty decent. If you wanted to adjust his lips to bring his original mouth back into play, we could click on our layer mask, grab the brush tool, set our foreground color to black so that we remove from that mask, and then we could just go and reveal back his original lips like so. Looking at our before and after, we didn't have to do too much work to create a pretty drastic difference in the photo. We can also use Generative Fill to fix up damaged or weird edges around film scans of archived photos. For example, I just want to get rid of this white border and some of the damaged areas around the corners. To do this, I can just grab my marquee tool by pressing M, make sure the new selection mode is enabled, and I'll just click and drag around one edge like so, overlapping from the edge of the canvas over to a little bit of the photo. Then I want to select all of the other areas. So I'll hold the Shift key, click and drag out to select another area and add to the previous selection. Hold the Shift key and repeat this process around all of the other edges like so. And then I also want to add this little postal stamp, so I'll click on there. And now we can go to Generative Fill, leave it empty and click on Generate, and Photoshop will automatically extend and remove all of the areas within that selection. Looking at the before and after, hardly any work was done, and this would be nearly impossible without this tool. Another great use is to retouch your portraits and fix up any flyaways around your subject. Rather than having to do tons of manual sampling, we can just create a general lasso selection and Photoshop does the rest for us. Grabbing the Lasso tool by pressing L, we'll just create a rough selection on the edge of the subject's hair around any of the flyaways you want to remove, and then back to the other edge here, all the way around. I'll just go until I connect back. Once you're happy with your selection, we can just go to Generative Fill and leave it empty once again. So Photoshop will take the background as well as the subject's current hair and make the best guess of what can fill the in-between areas. Now with a single lasso adjustment, we have a variety of options to choose from. They all look super realistic, but way better than the original flyaways that we had. So definitely try to use that trick in one of your next portraits. Generative Fill is also one of the best ways to remove people you don't like anymore from your photos just by accessing the Lasso tool, creating a selection around the person that you no longer want in your image. Forget about this guy. He's not good for you anyways. We'll go all the way around, overlapping with the other subject, back around her coat and to here. Now we'll click on Generative Fill, leave it blank, click on Generate, so Photoshop will know to fill in the extra area with something that connects with the outer edges of our selection. And now that guy's out of our life and we just have our two friends hanging out together again. Now, if it's not just a single person ruining your photo and it's a crowd of people, then instead of using a selection, we can just use a tool called the Remove tool, which has Generative Fill built into it now. Accessing the Remove tool underneath all of your healing brushes here, we'll find the Remove tool. We can go up to Find Distractions and then choose People, and that will automatically select some people in your photos, but it doesn't always do a great job. In this case, I know it doesn't work in this photo, so I'm just gonna go and paint over things manually. I'll make sure the mode is set to auto, so that will use Generative Fill, and I'll make sure Sample All Layers is enabled. To do this non-destructively, I'll create a new layer above my previous, call this to Removal, and then just start painting over all of the subjects that I do not want in view. That includes all of their shadows. This might take a couple seconds here, so I will skip ahead to when all of my painting is finished. Now from here, if there's any areas that you don't like, we can of course just paint over them individually to go and fix them up, such as the bus, for example. But turning this on and off, you can see how it does the majority of the work for us. There of course is some touch-ups to do, but we could just use the remove tool or use the generative fill adjustment with the lasso tool to go and fix all of this up. Without the help of AI, none of these adjustments would likely be possible. The next AI features in Photoshop aren't actually with generative fill, but are instead found within some filters. So I'll click on my image layer and duplicate it by pressing Command or Control J so we're working non-destructively. Then we'll go up to Filter and down to Neural Filters. In this window, the first AI tool we have is Skin Smoothing. Clicking on this will automatically smooth our subject's skin, give them a more angelic magazine look. We can of course change these settings as we would like to make it more or less intense, but that is our first feature there. Our next AI tool within the neural filters is the Smart Portrait, where we can go and change people's facial expressions. It doesn't always work super well, but let's say we crank up the happiness here, and it forces our subject to have a new smile. Of course, this one looks not very good, but you can play around with it in your photos. It definitely has hit and miss results. We can also change the age of someone just with a slider as well. We can increase the age or make them look younger. Let's make her look a lot older. Let's say we're creating some kind of dramatic thumbnail, for example. It's going to change up our subject's hair, add some wrinkles and things. Maybe it doesn't work super well with the skin smoothing, but if we set our output to new layer masked, we'll be able to just mask away any of the subject's hair, but keep the effects on her face, for example. That way you can keep the good, but get rid of the bad. Going further along the lines of retouching, we could do things like change our subject's lip color or add lipstick. So I'll grab the lasso tool by pressing L, create a selection around the outside of the subject's mouth, and then click Generative Fill and red lipstick. Click Generate. And now we have a pretty good looking lipstick effect that is in the relative shape of the subject's mouth. Our next effect that we could do is, for example, add some more eyelashes. Using the lasso tool, I'll just select an area around the subject's eyelashes to add more into. I'll repeat this process by holding Shift and selecting some other areas around both eyes. Now this gives us some whole new eyelashes for our subject that we didn't have to create from scratch or paint manually. Next up, we can even change our subject's eye color. We can just create a general selection of our subject's eyes. For example, using the rectangular marquee tool, I'll create a selection around one eye like so. Hold the Shift key and create another selection of the other eye. Hold the space bar to move that selection if you make a mistake. Then we can click on Generative Fill and type in a new eye color. Let's say green eyes. Now we get some wild green eye colors. You could try some other color prompts to get a different look, but of course we have quickly changed up that effect. Now she looks a bit more like a witch, but that is an effect that we could do. I'll just delete that green eyes layer because I do not like how those green eyes are staring at me, but I'm going to go and now do another AI adjustment, which is changing our subject's clothing. So let's say, for example, we want to change the color of this subject's shirt. I'll select it with the lasso tool, going around all edges and then a little bit above her shoulders in this case. And then we can trace along the edge of the shirt so we define a outline for the clothing. Now you can go and type in your desired clothing. I'll do black button-up shirt, click Generate. And now our subject's in a totally new outfit that might work better for her headshot or whatever else they were needing this photo for. We could also go and add some extra accessories. Say she forgot to wear her necklace that day, so we could create a selection of an area for a necklace to appear like this, and then type in something like gold necklace. Hopefully it doesn't make her look like two chains out here. We'll click on Generate. And now we got a handful of different options. You could continue to regenerate this as you would like to, maybe get some different results. But either way, looking at that before and after, pretty drastic difference just using some AI tools. Going along the same lines as a business headshot, let's say you just take a selfie like I did here and you want to turn yourself into a corporate hero with your headshot, but you didn't want to book that expensive photographer. So I'll use my lasso tool and create a selection just around the inner edge of my hairline, around my face, and down across my neck. With our selection made, we now want to select the background, so I'll click on the invert selection option to select everything except for my face. Click on Generative Fill. For my prompt, I'll just type in male corporate business headshot, office background, and collared shirt. It's just out there, but I'll click on Generate now and see what happens. Now I have a few different options of me in a suit. I kind of look like a thumb in some of them, but hey, now I got my business headshot I could go and put on my website. Now we can also use AI to customize our hairstyle if you've ever wondered how you might look with that different haircut. For example, my girlfriend always tells me that I would look pretty interesting if I were bald. So let's go and select my hair all the way around the hairline here. and then back around the top. With the hairline selected, we can go to Generative Fill, and I'm going to type in buzz cut. Click on Generate. Now I know for sure that I don't want a buzz cut because I kind of look like I'm on the show Prison Break, but hey, now you can check out different hairstyles for yourself or other people. We can also use these tools to quickly change backgrounds without any advanced knowledge of Photoshop. All we need to do is first duplicate our image layer by pressing Command or Control J. Then on the duplicated image, we'll click on Select Subject from the contextual taskbar. And then if there's any areas that you need to add into your selection, just select the Quick Selection tool, hold the Shift key, and then paint over any additional areas that you want to include in your photo that will remain in front of the background we generate. Once you're happy with this selection, we'll add a layer mask to remove the background from that photo. If I disable that underlying layer, you can see it's cut out. Now though, we want to generate a new image based on the background. So I'll hold Command or Control, click on the layer thumbnail, then invert the selection to select the background. With this inverted selection, we can go to Generative Fill and type in the new background. I'll type in Alpine Valley Meadow and click on Generate. Now by default, things might look a bit wild, which is why we cut out our image beforehand. So I'll drag this cutout image up above everything else so that now the good image is in front of the AI. And then we can just use something like the Remove tool, clicking on the AI layer, adding a new layer above it. I'll call this to Removal. And with the Remove tool selected, I can just go and paint over the weird areas of the AI image that I do not want to have in the final result here. Repeat this process over anywhere that you do not like. And now we're left with this nice new background for our photo, fully generated by AI. You can type in any prompt you want to create tons of different backgrounds in your photos. Now, rather than creating graphics from scratch or finding them online, we can also use AI to generate graphics within a photo super easily. All we need to do is create a selection loosely in the shape of the graphic we want to create. So I'll grab the Lasso tool here, and let's say I want to generate a painted leaf of sorts. So I can just go and create a shape of a leaf very loosely here, something like this. Pretty much any leaf can hopefully fit inside this. Click on Generative Fill, and let's type in watercolor maple leaf PNG and click it Generate. That gives us a custom graphic, not necessarily in the shape of our original selection, but that way we didn't have to go and find this online. We can also use Generative Fill in Photoshop to blend images together. For example, let's say I want this model to have sort of like a flower dress coming up. So rather than her original dress, we'll place this image here and we'll extend it with AI. So I'll access my Lasso tool and then just click and drag around the area that I want the flowers to fill within. So something out here like this, and then back around the inner edge of the current flower so Photoshop knows what to extend from. With your selection made, just go to Generative Fill, leave it empty, and click on Generate. When you leave it empty, Photoshop will know to blend the outer edges of both parts of the selection to create something new. That creates this nice flower effect. We can get a few different options here, but this one looks really nice. The flowers are now extended and we didn't have to go through the painstaking process of adding all these flowers manually. We can also create custom frames with these tools. So accessing the Marquee tool by pressing M, let's go and create a selection around the subject, something like this, for example. Hold the space bar if you want to move it around at all. With your selection made, we'll invert it so that we're selecting everything outside to define our frame. And then we can go and describe the frame that we want to use. I'll type in something like torn paper photo frame and click on Generate. And with a few variations, we can settle on something that looks pretty interesting and would be really hard to create without these tools. We can also generate brand new photos from scratch with some additional tools that aren't available within just Generative Fill. Instead, we'll go to the bottom of our toolbar and click on this option right here. And this brings up a Generate Image window where we can type in a more specific prompt and choose between a bunch of other advanced settings. The settings I'll use for this example is a fancy dark purple tuned hypercar with carbon fiber parts and quadruple exhaust pipes. French Riviera Coastal Road Motion Blur Fast concept art. We want it to look like a photo, and the effects here are cinematic and concept art. I'll click on Generate and see what we get. Looking between our different examples here, we get some pretty cool looking images. You can of course experiment with these prompts endlessly to see what you can create. Now in situations where you have a vertical photo that you want to look horizontal, for example, then we can extend our images using Generative Expand, which is something found within the Crop tool. Accessing the Crop tool by pressing C, or we can find it right here in the toolbar. Let's go and extend the outer edges of the canvas here. So I'll hold Alt or Option and click and drag from the side to extend it out. And then in the Fill option, I want this to be set to Generative Expand. I'll press the check mark and Photoshop will work its magic to fill in those extra areas around the photo. This very quickly extends out that that image for us, gives us a handful of great backgrounds to choose from. So now you could print that photo in a different orientation without too much work. But what if you're in a situation where you want to extend a layer and not the entire canvas? Well, in that case, just click on the photo that you want to extend, grab the marquee tool by pressing M, and then create a marquee selection around that photo and the area that you want to extend to. So I'll do something like this. And with our selection made, I'll just disable the underlying layers so that our AI doesn't get confused. Click on Generative Fill and choose Generate. Now just that one layer has been extended. If anything has been changed that you don't like, we can of course click on our layer mask, grab the brush tool by pressing B, and then paint black over that mask to reveal back the original image and remove those AI effects. Now, a lesser known use is to create creative effects for your type. To begin, I'll create a rectangular marquee selection around the text to define the area for my effect to be visible in. We'll create some spray paint text here. Then I want to subtract the inner edge of the text. So I'll hold Command or Control and Alt or Option and click on the thumbnail of the type layer to subtract from that selection. And then I want to go and expand my selection. So I'll go to Modify Selection, Expand Selection. I'll leave this to 15 and click OK. This will bring the outer edge out and the inner edge in. And now I can type in something like splattered paint edges. And we're left with a bunch of different effects to stylize our text without any work. Now, if you ever need textures in your images, you can obviously create them super easily with AI as well. This time I'll go to the Generate Image option and I'll type in brick texture, flat lighting, red bricks. I want it to be photorealistic, and you could go and choose some effects, but I'll leave it empty. I'll click on Generate. You might need to cycle the generation a few times, but either way, you now have a simple texture that you can apply into your text or other graphics. Now, if you ever need to remove someone's tattoo, the easiest way to do that is still with AI. We can use the Lasso tool. Just create a lasso selection around the tattoos that we want to remove. You don't have to be too specific about the edges that you go over. I'd recommend to do this one at a time, but just click on Generative Fill and then Generate. And then we could repeat the process down around any other tattoos that we would want to remove from the photo. Now, the same kind of concept would apply if you wanted to add tattoos, creating the same kind of selection, but then describing the tattoo that you'd want within the prompt. Now, whenever you're creating a mockup and you want to create your own, you don't want to rely on a template, you'll need to first have a base image to start your mockup from. We can create them from scratch with our Generate Image option. Clicking on the Generate Image feature, we'll go ahead and describe the object we want to create. The prompt I'll use is plain silver pop can on white studio background, mockup template, even lighting. I'll choose photo and then just click on Generate. Now we have a few different options to choose from that we could go ahead and build our mockup from. We can also quickly remove power lines with these features, but rather than selecting them, AI will automatically detect them for us. In this city image, for example, we'll just start by selecting our Remove tool by pressing J. Go to Find Distractions and then Wires and Cables. Clicking on that will automatically select all of those cables and remove them from our photo without any work. No selections were needed, no complicated masking, just the cables are gone and we're moving on to the next example. Another use case is for architects who have mockups that they might need to add some extra elements into. Rather than having to go and generate those new elements, we can just create them in Photoshop with AI. Accessing the marquee tool by pressing M, I'll just click and drag to create an area for a new door, for example. I'll just go and click and drag like this, click on Generative Fill, and type in glass French doors. Clicking Generate, we're now able to quickly add something new into this photo. If you don't like the result that you get, of course, just keep clicking Generate until you're happy with how it looks. Now in your regular photos, if there's something that's just a little bit distracting or ruining your composition, we can quickly remove them just by using the Lasso tool, selecting around the object that you want to remove. Especially on something like sand where there's lots of textures, it can be hard to remove this and still have a nice looking texture left behind. But with Generative Fill, I'll just click on there and choose Generate, and it will typically do a really good job at blending in those difficult textures that sometimes are near impossible with something like the clone stamp tool. Now finally, we can go and use these tools to generate new things in our photos to create composites, for example, or other creative edits. For example, let's just say I want to add a fire down in here. So I'll create a selection of the fire, and somewhere like this will be the fire pit. Click on Generative Fill, type in campfire and generate. Now we have this really nicely blended campfire in there that would be super hard to blend ourselves, but we could go and take this a bit further by adding some extra flames into here. So I'll just click and drag over the areas I want to add a little bit more fire and life into, and we can just type in flames and see what it gives us. Turning that on and off, it just adds a little extra something to the photo, and now we have a totally different vibe in this image, all with the help of AI. Now, if you're still watching at this point in the video, thank you so much for sticking with me through all of these examples. And if you want to learn more about generative fill, more at an in-depth and specific level, then make sure to check out this video here next, where I do a deep dive into everything you need to know about generative fill and how to operate it like an absolute pro. Just click the video right here to watch that next, and I hope to see you there.